I'm not going to tell you this the way I'd write it in a report. Reports have formats, boxes, categories. What happened out there doesn't fit in any of those. So I'm just going to say it the way it actually was, and you can decide what to do with it. The first time I heard it, I was on a routine boundary patrol. Eastern edge of the reservation, where the Douglas fir gets so dense the light stops working properly around mid-afternoon. I'd done that route maybe 60 times. I knew the sounds. Ravens, elk moving through the lower brush, the specific way wind behaves when it comes off the ridgeline and drops into the draw. I knew all of it. That's why I stopped walking when I heard the voice. It wasn't words. Not yet. It was more like the shape of a voice. The cadence of someone about to say something. Coming from the tree line, maybe 40 meters to my north. I stood there for probably 10 seconds just listening. And then it stopped. And the forest went quiet in that particular way forests go quiet when something has changed. I told myself it was a hiker. Called out. Nothing. Marked the location in my notes. Finished the patrol. Didn't think about it again for almost 3 weeks. That was my first mistake. Not the last. I'd been a ranger on reservation land for 11 years. Before that, 2 years with the Forest Service further north. I'm telling you this so you understand I'm not someone who spooks easily. And I'm not someone who talks about things I can't back up. I've filed hundreds of incident reports. I've handled bear encounters, medical emergencies, drownings. One situation I'm still not legally allowed to discuss in detail. I know the difference between a bad night in the woods and something that requires a different kind of attention. What happened in the Ochoko boundary zone required a different kind of attention. And for 4 years, I didn't give it that. 4 years of notes I didn't connect. 4 years of telling myself I was being rational.
The decision to talk about it now didn't come from nowhere. There was a report filed 6 weeks ago. Young woman, solo hiker, went off trail in the exact area I'm going to describe. She was found 2 days later, disoriented, malnourished, about 4 miles from where she'd last been seen. She couldn't explain how she got there. She said she'd been following her brother's voice. Her brother lives in Portland. He wasn't anywhere near Oregon that weekend. I read that report, and I sat in my truck for a long time. And then I decided that staying quiet wasn't the same thing as being careful. My first full season on the reservation land was in the fall. I was assigned the Northeastern Patrol Grid, which covers a stretch that runs along the boundary between managed forest and the older growth that the tribal council controls access to. There's a reason access is controlled. It's not bureaucratic. The land back there is different in a way that's hard to articulate in practical terms. The trees are older. The undergrowth is thicker. The animal behavior changes noticeably once you cross a certain elevation. Elk don't go past a particular ridgeline. I noticed that in my first month and asked one of the older rangers about it. He shrugged and said the elk knew something we didn't. About 6 weeks into that first season, I was introduced to an elder from the community. I won't use his name. He came out to the ranger station for a meeting about trail access and stayed afterward to talk to me specifically. He'd heard I was new to the area. He was polite, precise, didn't waste words. He told me there were protocols for patrolling the northeastern grid. Don't go past the second ridgeline alone after 3 p.m. Don't respond to sounds you can't immediately identify the source of. If you hear something familiar in an unfamiliar location, mark it and leave. Don't try to investigate. I wrote it down.
I treated it like local knowledge, the same way you'd learn that a particular creek floods without warning or that a trail is unstable after rain. Practical information from someone who knew the terrain. I didn't understand the weight of what he was telling me. I didn't understand it was a warning about something specific. I thought it was regional caution passed down through generations of people who'd had bad experiences in dense wilderness. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost all of it. It was a Tuesday in late October when I heard my name. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I've spent years trying to make sure I'm being accurate and not just frightening. The voice I heard was Marcus's voice. Marcus was my patrol partner, a ranger I'd worked with for almost 2 years at that point. I knew his voice the way you know the voices of people you spend significant time with. The specific cadence, the way he drops the end of sentences slightly, a particular quality that's just his. What I heard in that tree line was not similar to Marcus's voice. It was Marcus's voice. Saying my name. From the north side of the draw, about 60 meters in, where the visibility drops to almost nothing. I called back, immediately, without thinking, which was exactly what I'd been told not to do. The voice called again, closer, still from the tree line. I was moving toward it before I consciously decided to. That's the detail that still bothers me most. The decision to walk toward it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like recognition. Like, of course you walk toward a colleague who's calling you from the woods. I stopped myself about 20 meters in. Something shifted in the quality of the sound. A response that came just slightly too fast. A repetition that was almost right but not quite. Like a recording with a minor error in it.
I stopped walking and stood there, and the forest went quiet again. Same as that first time 3 weeks earlier. And I turned around and went back to the trail. Marcus was doing a vehicle check at the south trailhead. He'd been there for 2 hours. I confirmed it with the log. He hadn't been anywhere near that draw. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't tell anyone. I wrote a vague note in my personal log, and I kept working. And I told myself there was an explanation. I just hadn't found yet. 3 months later, a hiker named Daniel Reyes went missing in the same grid. He was experienced, mid-40s, had logged over 200 documented backcountry days across Oregon and Washington. He knew the difference between a trail and a game path. He had a GPS unit, a satellite communicator, 3 days of food for a 1-day hike. He was not someone who got lost. 2 witnesses saw him before the trail split. Both of them said the same thing independently. They said he looked like he'd heard something. One of them described it as the expression people get when they hear their phone ring in another room. That specific kind of alertness. That certainty. He turned off the main trail and walked into the tree line with complete confidence, like he was heading towards something he recognized. They found his pack 4 days later. GPS unit still on. The satellite communicator had been activated, but only the emergency signal. No voice contact. His last confirmed location put him less than half a mile from where I'd heard the voice call my name. They didn't find Daniel Reyes. The official classification was lost hiker, presumed deceased. The search coordinator cited terrain difficulty and the late season weather conditions. Those things were true. The terrain is difficult. The weather was poor. None of that explains the GPS data. None of that explains why a man with 200 backcountry days walked off a clear trail toward a sound with that expression on his face.
I went to the elder after that. I told him what I'd experienced. The voice in the draw, the way I'd moved toward it without deciding to. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said that he'd hoped it had moved on. That sometimes it did. That they'd had 20 years without a serious incident, and some people had started to believe it was gone. What he told me next took about an hour. I'm going to compress it because some of it is not mine to share, and some of it I was specifically asked not to repeat in full. But the core of it was this. The thing in that territory is not an animal. It's not a person. It's something that has been in that land for longer than the community's recorded history. It learns. That's the word he used, and he used it deliberately. It learns the sounds that cause humans to respond. It started with animal calls, mimicking distress sounds that would draw hunters or curious people toward it. At some point, and no one knows exactly when, it graduated to voices. Human voices. Specific voices. Voices belonging to people the target knows. There are protocols because the community learned them through laws. You don't answer unidentified sounds. You don't move toward a familiar voice without visual confirmation. You never, under any circumstances, enter the tree line alone after the light starts to go. Not because darkness makes it more active necessarily, but because darkness removes your ability to catch the wrongness in time. The wrongness. That's how he described it. The slight error in the mimicry. The response that's almost right but carries something off underneath it. He said that error is always there if you're calm enough to notice it. He said the problem is that recognition, the feeling of hearing someone you know, bypasses calm. It bypasses rational processing. You're already moving before your brain has finished deciding anything. He also told me that it's drawn to response.
If you answer it, you've told it something. You've told it the sound is working, and it remembers. I thought about the number of times I'd called out on patrol when I heard something I couldn't immediately identify. Standard ranger behavior. You hear movement, you announce yourself. You call out. You listen for a response. I had been, without knowing it, teaching it for years. There's one thing I could never put in a report. There were things you can document. Sounds, locations, timelines, the objective facts of a missing person case. What I'm about to describe has no category in any form I've ever filled out, and I've tried to figure out how to file it for 3 years. 2 weeks after Daniel Reyes was declared presumed deceased, I was doing a solo sweep of the recovery boundary, looking for gear, any physical evidence the search teams might have missed. Near the second ridgeline, the one the elder had specifically told me not to cross alone, I found a pattern in the moss on a series of trees. 6 trees, spaced irregularly, each with the same compression mark on the bark at roughly shoulder height, like something had stood against each tree in turn, stood there long enough to leave a mark. The marks were the same height, consistent. That height was approximately 6'2". Daniel Reyes was 5'8". I'm 6 foot even. There are no other rangers who patrol that grid regularly. I measured the marks 3 times. I photographed them. I uploaded the photographs to the case file under general recovery evidence, with no additional notation. Because what do you write? What category exists for that? Here's what makes it worse. About a year later, I was talking with a ranger from a different grid, no connection to the Reyes case, and she mentioned finding something similar near her boundary. Same ridge system, different section. She'd also photographed it, also filed it under general evidence, also said nothing. And then, 2 months after that conversation, a ranger who'd retired the previous year called the station for unrelated reasons, and in the conversation mentioned that he'd found identical marks during his last active season, 3 years before any of this started. None of us had compared notes. None of us had spoken about it. We all arrived at the same decision to document it quietly and say nothing, independently, for reasons we couldn't fully articulate even to ourselves. If you're listening to this and you hike in that region, I need you to hear this next part clearly, not as a story, as a direct instruction from someone who has spent 11 years in that specific terrain. If you hear a voice you recognize, and you cannot see the person it belongs to, do not answer. Do not call back. Do not move toward it. Turn around. Walk away from the sound at a steady pace. Do not run, because running is a response, and a response is information. Just walk. Keep walking until you're back on a main trail with other people in visible range. The wrongness is there if you're calm enough to catch it. The problem is that recognition isn't calm. It's immediate. It's certain. It feels like relief, hearing a familiar voice when you're alone in the woods. That feeling is the mechanism. That feeling is exactly what it's learned to produce. The woman from 6 weeks ago, the one who followed her brother's voice for 4 miles, she's back home now. She's okay, physically. But she told the responding ranger that the voice had gotten better the longer she followed it. More accurate, more convincing. Like it was adjusting in real time. Like it was learning her, specifically, the longer she stayed within range.
She got lucky. She got tired before it finished learning. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't stopped. I don't know what it wants. The elder didn't tell me that part, and I didn't ask. Some questions create their own kind of weight.
What I know is that it's still there. It's still active. And the last recorded incident was 6 weeks ago. Not years ago. Not a generation ago. 6 weeks ago. 4 miles from the trailhead, in an area that gets weekend hikers every single month. I'm not telling you to stay out of the woods. I'm telling you to know the difference between a sound and a voice. And to know that if a voice reaches you before the person does, that gap, that space between hearing someone and seeing them, that's where it lives. Don't close that gap.